Hello, this is Dr. Home and Reverend Leng. Pandamix, conversations, healing conversations, and practices in between times. So today, we'll get to uncover more of the conversation around feelings, the disconnection of feelings, and how do we recover, how do we heal by reconnecting with our feelings. On the last episode, we talked about how hurt people hurt people. Mm-hmm. And we also talked about the importance of beginning to begin to tell stories. And you had introduced the topic of Stoicism and how Stoicism might be misunderstood and misused, particularly in the American culture. And then for this episode, we will dive deeper into understanding the trauma of bystanding and also hyper-individualism. So it's a lot. We may be able to cover everything. If not, we continue on the next episode. Yeah? So let's begin with Stoicism.
Yeah, so we were describing a phenomenon where it's hard to be empathetic to other people's stories, especially when there is hurt or victimization involved, because somehow we want to fix it, which means getting rid of it, or we feel ourselves implicated in their victim story. And that we said, we notice this among men, and in the US context, among white men. And that we had also noticed this inability to, or resistance to feeling one's own sorrows and pain and grief, the darker, more tender feelings. And what's going on here in the internal life and the disconnection from one's own experiences of vulnerability or tenderness or failure. And so often when this is brought up to that we should or want to be more connected to our feelings, the issue that comes up in US culture is Stoicism. Now Stoicism was one of several Roman philosophies that at its best basically says something quite Buddhist as well. It says there are things you can control and things you cannot control. And you can't control external events. What you can control is your internal life, your internal impulses and desires, your aversions, your feelings. You can manage that. This is exactly what Buddha says as well. And Stoicism has had a new lease of life in Silicon Valley. Now, it's one way, and an important way, to know how to manage the internal emotional life. Because it's a way to harness energy and to decide. And Marcus Aurelius, Roman emperor, was a wise practitioner of that. I mean, if you read some of his writings, he's coming to the end of his reign. He's experiencing the wreckage of his body. He's old. He still has to be out there in the frontiers. And he's come face to face. Here is the Roman emperor, God. And then experiencing the frailty of his emotional body. And so he's essentially working with what we would call, suffering and the tragedy of life, So the Stoic philosophy of now what you do, you have to master your internal life. You can't, run off and be hysterical or be aggressive or be out of control or acting out. So that's the right place to do that. And incidentally, it's really important to also remember that it was, Epictetus, who was one of the early founders of Stoicism, and he was a slave. He was a black man, and we can begin to understand why this is important. In other words, it's how do you work with the tragedies of life. We all need that kind of wisdom. The problem is, we are asking across the board young people in the United States to start being stoic very early on in their lives. In other words, to ask them to discount their feelings. And I thought about that because
I think it's actually not even asking, they're just watching their fathers.
And mothers even.
And their brothers and so on.
Yes.
Numbing out, checking out, non-expressing emotional connection.
That's right. Not expressing, not even tuning in. And the classic was when one of my godsons had a breakup with his first girlfriend. The advice was, you get over it. And of course,
get over it quick and move on.
And that reminded me like how I had, and you too have heard that with our many executives who will tell us stories of something that happened in a family or in a business. And then they are the ones that say, I'll get over it, or I must get over it, or, I'm getting over it. and you're wondering, whoa, you and I didn't even say that to them. Some voice in them told them, they should get over it. Sometimes they'll even directly say to us, I should get over it. And I'm thinking, oh, this has come about from the culture, from the water in which people are swimming in, and they can't even see the culture, can't even see the water, and the water is telling them to get over it. Get over what? Well, get over feelings, particularly the tender feelings. And that there is a cost to doing that, because when I think of my godson, it's like if he hasn't processed his feeling of loss and heartbreak, he's not going to be able to do the next relationship well. He's going to come into the next relationship with his heart more shut down than open. And I think, we've talked about this, our listeners may find this helpful. Why is this a problem? So, first of all, our feeling life is our moral life as well. It's not just our thinking life that is our moral and ethical life. It is from the feeling place that we also have a conscience. And this cutting off that says everything up here is elevated, that came out of René Descartes' work in the Enlightenment, cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. No, I feel, I am conscious, therefore I am. And Anthony Damasio, who's a neuroscientist at UC San Diego, wrote a book called Descartes' Error. It's an error to think it's just here. Ian McGilchrist, in his book, The Master and His Emissary, How the Divided Brain Has Shaped the West, likewise says this whole left brain hyper-rationalization thing is getting the West, and therefore all of us as well, into trouble. Because this other part of the feeling part is intelligent, and then I want to say it's where our conscience lives.
Let's take a breath together. So notice how this conversation get us really energized in our thinking. Again, this is an invitation for those of you who are watching and listening. Do both. Listen with your thinking mind, but also feeling body. So if you notice, if you're walking and listening to this, notice your body walking. If you notice that you're sitting, then feel what it's like to sit and the emotions are coming up as you listen. Okay? Let's take another breath. So what I'm hearing from you that's really resonating is the cutting off of the feelings. Where especially boys watching their parents, watching their fathers, boys being told to get over it and get over it quickly. And so there's a pattern of repression, of suppression of feelings, of cutting off.
Yes.
Now, I can hear some people say, well, you cannot wallow in that victim story of losing a girlfriend. Everybody loses a girlfriend at some point. People lose marriages, people who lose family. You cannot just wallow in it, get over it quickly. How would you respond to that?
Yeah, so the managing, I think that's right. I'm tempted to say that those who wallow are the ones who actually are disconnected from feelings, and then the feelings leak out. And then it's so persistent because it's leaking out as unprocessed grief or unprocessed fear or shame or trauma, and then you are stuck wallowing in it. The function for cutting off feelings, of any kind of feelings, is so that we can move into action. We know this from trauma work. We know this, that's what soldiers do. You cut off the fear that the bombs are coming and you focus. So the function is to override feelings in order to move into action. And no surprise, I think in the last few thousand years where men have been in charge of patriarchy, that's what men now instinctively do to move into action. But then the trauma is retained in the body, and the unprocessed feelings is retained in the body, and it's retained in many ways, including the numbing out of all sorts of other good feelings that don't take place.
I mean, the numbing out is what causing depression and anxiety.
Yes, because if you lower down, if you emotions are like a master switch. If you switch off, say, wanting to feel sad, because somehow you're not allowed to. I mean, I know someone who, had a death in the family and then had an exam to take, and then basically said, not feeling sad, and passed the exam, but then wasn't able to get back to unlocking the switch. So sadness, you tamp down the feeling sadness. You also end up lowering down your capacity to feel joy and to feel love and to feel spontaneity and to feel connection, because it's a master switch. You switch off that light in the room, all the lights in the house all go down. Right? So that then typically we say of guys, the only permissible emotion to feel and to display, meaning to show publicly, is aggression, right?
and in America, particularly pride.
And the pride that comes with it, pride and aggression. Yeah, that's right. Mm-hmm. So if you're feeling fearful, get angry. If you're feeling sad, get angry. I think one of the things we do in our coaching, if when someone is mad, is to say, where's sad? If you're mad, where is sad? And why this happens? Again, I think we keep on talking about this in our episodes, right? The conditioning to be part of the ruling class. If you are male, like we are, our conditioning is to rule, to be in control, to fix, even to help is a way to rule. And so there's this terrible cost to it. The other part, of course, is the hyper-individualism.
Say more about that.
To be an individual, you see, in the States, I think we mix up being an individual and being a person. Being a person is I am a full human being and unique. And then I know you are another human being too and unique. And we know from our time in spending in South Africa with our friend Mpo, Tutu, Mpo gave us this word Ubuntu, this word that says, I'm a person, and I only become a person in relationship with you as a person. We help each other discover our personhood, where we are same and where we are different. So we need this mutual regard from each other. And Confucius pretty much say the same thing about being humane, and the Jewish philosopher Martin Buber pretty much says we are engaged in an I-thou relationship, I-you relationship with each other and ultimately with the divine and with God. But we've turned things into an I-it relationship. You're another object for me to use. You're another resource. You're a member of my network. You are a human resource.
I mean, that's where the roots of slavery.
Yes, turning a human being into an object, a non-human, into a thing. And in individualism is this notion that says, not person, I am an individual. Yeah, you're an individual, that's true, but then it's turned into a belief, a religious belief. Individualism, rugged individualism. I'm going to pull myself up by my bootstraps. And you want to sort of say, who made the bootstraps? Another being made the bootstraps for you. Another animal gave up its life so that you could have the bootstraps. We are completely in interdependency with other beings. We are always in this Ubuntu place. But if we cut it off and don't feel into this connection, then you're an individual, I'm an individual, I can go out and conquer the world and do my own thing. You're looking.
Well, I'm already sense that some people, let's say from a different culture, who are so collective-minded,
Yes.
let's say from Thailand or in Bali,
Ah.
right? They're like also focused on what it
the
means.
collectivism as the other end of
Right.
things.
And
yes.
they come to the US and are like, oh my God, I have a freedom to be whoever I like.
Indeed.
You know,
And you and I have experienced that.
And there's a kind of freedom to that. And many people come to America with that understanding that, wow, I get to be free, do whatever fuck I want.
Yes, that's right.
So what's wrong with that?
And so what you're tapping into is that collectivism, where you are completely not just belonging to the group, but completely enmeshed in it, and you don't have will, and you don't have agency, or that's always going to have to be subsumed to the collective, where, as they say, the nail that sticks up is hammered down, or the tall poppy is cut. And that's certainly been the Asian collective mindset.
So that's the other extreme.
That's the other extreme. Then you don't get to experience your personhood, right? And the culture doesn't give support to experience your personhood. And so when you and I came to the United States in our teenage years, which is also why coming to the US was the place many of us came out, where we can break out of the confinement of our culture and discover our own sexuality, and more than that, our unique, passions for life and vocation, and that's great.
Yeah, for example, like I decided I'm not going to be a doctor like my father.
A medical doctor. Yes, you're a different doctor.
Yeah, I'm a different kind of doctor
right.
now, but I'm going to be an artist.
Indeed. So, but what we can say of that practice is that is individuation, a notion that Carl Jung gave us, to individuate. Again, a spiritual process of discovering your unique, precious, just like thumbprints, unique, different, and the glory and beauty of that. So that's to individuate, to find your personhood. It's not just hyper-individualism. Interestingly enough, the American hyper-individualism is, if you look at it, a kind of conformity. It's actually a deep, deep conformity to an unexamined ethos of how you should be. So Peggy Orenstein, I think that's her name, wrote a book called Boys and Sex, and it's also a lovely podcast where she's interviewing boys, American boys, about sex. And it validates what we have discovered talking to our American friends, that it's other boys that orientate boys into what it means to be boys and to be masculine, and how they should then react to girls, which is to do two things. And I don't want to butcher her book, so let me say what I have discovered but I think the book validifies it, which is, and I think came from out of our curiosity as Asians coming here, because you get the sense that, you know, in the West, people have sex really early on. So the question is, you know, how old were you when you had sex, and was it because you loved her? And the experience is like, hell no. Then it's like, oh, so she was, you know, really, really sexy. And it's not that either. As it turns,
she was the thing that I just need to be conquer.
she was the thing to get.
To get.
And it's a kind of conquering. And it's not, I need to get it. It's this implicit thing that the boys would like it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so it's almost like the boys had come up with their little set of a list, not unlike Mark Zuckerberg at Harvard when he started Facebook with the like and dislike. There are goals that you get or conquer, and they're the ones that you don't. It gives you no credit to go after her. You know, and that's the conformity that is behind this hyper-individualism that says, oh, I've gone out and conquered and done my thing. Again, you're not feeling, and you get yourself into not only psychological trouble because you're repressing your tender feelings, but you get yourself into moral trouble because that's going to be where that will eventually lead to the kind of a date rape. You know, I mean, one can even begin to see that the Grindr and Tinder culture and all of that of swipe left, swipe right is not only is this a culture that makes objects out of beings, you have made an object out of yourself. And when we consent to becoming objects, we are used by the system in an unconscious way, and I hope we get to talk about that. But we have let ourselves to not become persons.
So the question I have then is how to recover that personhood, how to have the connection, this whole being. When I live in a culture where, you know, it's all about me and how much I can consume and what the bigger thing I can get and the next thing I can get, and that I have to be better than the other person. And if I'm not better than the other person, then there's something wrong with me and I'm a loser, and there's no one likes losers in America. So why would one not want to compete and win all the time?
Well, no, it's funny. I remembered in business school at Harvard that someone came in to talk about a Goldman Sachs director who had died at work with a cigar on. He had heart attack, and he was smoking his cigar, and he had actually died of a heart attack, and people didn't know. And the story was told. And I remember looking at my classmates, and quite a number was like, wow, amazing. And there was a small group of us that thought, my gosh, this is terrible. So yeah, I think there are people who do believe that the ones who die with the most toys have won. And then there are those of us who go, wow, really? You know, folks have to make up their minds on this issue, whether to have things is really a sign of winning. But we are talking about having our full selves and the wonder of living in this earth where we can have all of that. And how do we get out of that is to really feel all of these feelings, including, I might want to add, feeling deep joy. I once met a man 10 years my age, German, who said, oh, my whole struggle, my whole life is to feel joy. Because he said, each time I feel joy, I feel there's something wrong and I'm ashamed. And he traced it to having been raised by two German parents who had gone through the First World War and the Second World War and the trauma of that, so that when he was born after the Second World War, and children are naturally effusive and alive, his parents really censored him and shut him up because they felt that was dangerous. But we are saying from our work that to have access to your full humanity of intuition and rationality and the entire feeling self, make us full human beings. We will experience the whole of life. We will be better ethical beings, moral beings, with a capacity to grow our relationships and our families and lead our organizations much better. This becomes an ethical imperative now, if a man is a leader, to have full access to his being. Otherwise, he is going to lead badly and wrongly. It's just one more story. A few years back, there was this story of this, it was a guy from a prep school, St. Paul's Episcopal in New Hampshire, one of the elite prep schools. And he had gotten into Harvard, and he had now been charged with date rape because the girl's parents reported it. But really what was going on was an old game that was being played in these elite places, of both boys and girls consenting to senior year being a time in which they hunted and let themselves be trophies. So that's really treating each other as objects, because there's this rite of passage that you go to. And I would say, he's going to have to take responsibility for what he did. What didn't happen was that the culture didn't take responsibility for saying to these young kids, this entire thing is absurd, and it's not about sex, and it's not even about consent, because I think a lot of it was consensual. But it's consensual objectification, and you can only consensually object the other person if you don't feel yourself. Then you can't feel the other, and then there's no Ubuntu.
It's no relationship.
No relationship, no honoring of the personhood and the sacredness of that.
Please take a breath with me. So I want to underline a few things here. You talk about Stoicism and the misuse of that. And so really important for us to cultivate the capacity to feel and then to observe those feelings.
And experience
and to experience the feelings. Then, out of that, cultivate a stable mind, stable awareness, and that is true Stoicism. The misuse of Stoicism in America, particularly with men and with many men, is actually a shutdown of feelings. And that is actually what creates trauma. And when I feel certain feelings, trauma or life experiences I have repressed and I have not healed that, then I go out and I create trauma and pain for others. And this is where the individual, the hyper-individualism is what also creating a lot of suffering and trauma for many.
For self and others.
Yes. So we'll complete here for this episode, and in the next episode, we'll go deeper to talk about how to heal from these trauma through stories again. Yes. Please take a breath with us.